The fluorescent light above the motel office sputtered, like it couldn't decide whether to die or keep pretending. Marin Albright noticed it as she eased her dented Corolla between two oil-dark rectangles on the asphalt. A moth pinwheeled around the buzzing vacancy sign, tapping the plexiglass like a blind thing reading Braille. The stucco looked sun-blistered, its seams spidered with hairline cracks that told the dull story of a place weathered past caring. None of it explained why her foot had lifted from the gas or why she'd turned in, except for the shape of a man hunched against the wall beneath the flicker. She saw him before he seemed to see her. Jacket creased by the kind of use that did not come from thrift store fashion, but from necessity. The drab green faded where elbows bent, where shoulders carried. Patches rubbed to ghosts. A duffel bag slumped beside him like a tired dog. He wasn't performing for pity. No cup, no sign, no theatrics, just eyes on the concrete, steady, as if the ground might answer a question if he stared hard enough. She cut the engine and everything went quiet except the sign's electric hum and the distant, unending shush of highway. She told herself to keep driving, that she had $47 in her checking account, that rent was due in 4 days, that she'd already stretched powdered milk into something like breakfast twice this week. She put her hand on the gear shift. She didn't move. "Hey," she said finally, because the silence started to feel like a decision she'd be ashamed of later. He looked up. His eyes were the washed-out blue of winter light. Not the kind of blue that dazzled, but the kind that simply was, indifferent to the observer. Weariness lived there, not anger, not even ask, just the guarded neutrality of someone done with the hope transaction. "You need a room?" she heard herself ask. His jaw worked once. "Don't got it," he muttered. Voice scuffed, soft as gravel under tires. "I'll cover it," Marin said, surprising herself with how steady she sounded. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you." She told herself not to care. Caring cost. Caring was rent money that turned into motel keys. Caring was the difference between sleeping and watching the ceiling fan draw slow circles while thoughts kept time. The night after she bought the room, she detoured anyway. The office light buzzed. The moth returned. The door to the room she'd paid for was closed, curtain drawn. She thought of leaving food at his door, a buttered roll, a small carton of milk, 2 hard-boiled eggs she'd pocketed from the night shift family meal, but the humiliation of found charity made her feel hot on his behalf. She kept walking. Marin's apartment sat above the laundromat and smelled faintly like other people's detergent dreams: mountain rain, alpine burst, lavender fields. It was one room pretending to be 2. There was a curtain you could pull to pretend there was a bedroom and a kitchen, but the curtain rod had bent over time, and now the curtain hesitated midway, as if it too couldn't be bothered to commit to a separation. She opened her window to let the night air cut the soap suite, and listened to the clack of a loose sign on the corner. She thought of reserve units and discharge papers, and the stubborn pride she'd grown up around, the way her father had taught her to mend a boot sole with an owl, to wrap a sprain with a dish towel when the pharmacy was closed, to press your mouth to your grief and blow into it like a stubborn campfire until it caught. He died 3 years ago. He died in winter. Even in June, winter had a way of living in the corners of things. Her mind offered an image of Gabe's hands without permission, thickened knuckles, nails trimmed blunt with a pocket knife, hands that read maps by touch. She rolled onto her side, then onto her back, then admitted what she was really doing, searching the day for a moment that felt like meaning. She had brushed against one, then said yes. On the 3rd morning, the bell over the diner door sounded its flat 2-note ding, and early heat shoved into the room like a rude guest. Marin tucked a piece of hair behind her ear with her wrist because her hands were full of plates. She slid pancakes onto a corner table and laughed the small, practiced laugh that smoothed over a customer's barb. She didn't see him come in. She felt him. A shift in the room's center of gravity, the minor gravitational pull of someone trying to orbit the periphery. He took the last stool at the counter, the one near the to-go pastry case where lemon bars glowed under plastic wrap like captured sunlight. He sat with his hands flattened on either side of the napkin dispenser, as if anchoring himself. His jacket was zipped, though the air already hissed with heat from the grill, and the day outside promised to be punishing. Maren turned toward him before she meant to. There was a half-second where his eyes were still on the coffee pot, and she could have gone on pretending the tilt of her attention wasn't a choice. Then he looked up, and the choice was a fact. "What can I get you?" she asked. It sounded like every other time she'd asked it, except it wasn't. "Just coffee," he said, "if that's all right." "It's a diner. It's practically church. Coffee is communion." She regretted the words as soon as they were out. Too much clever for a man who looked scraped raw by the act of existing. But he gave a small breath that wasn't a laugh, more like the shadow a laugh leaves on a face. "Then I guess amen." She poured. The coffee was cheap and dark and honest. He wrapped his hands around the mug the way cold people wrap around heat out of habit. Maren noticed the small tremor in his right hand. Old nerve damage? Sleep deprivation? She filed the observation in the drawer labeled, "Not your business," and left the drawer unlocked anyway. "You could get eggs," she said when she came back with creamers. "The cook makes them like they still remember being inside the shell. It's witchcraft." He looked at the menu like he was trying to read a language he hadn't used in a while. "How much?" "Employee meals on me," she said lightly. "Occupational hazard. We can't have me fainting into your coffee." The refusal rose to his face before the words did. Then he saw something in hers, resolve or stubbornness or that mule-boned compassion that refused to wear down, and he nodded once. "Scrambled. Toast if it comes with." "It does," she said. "Miracles abound." She put the order in and found herself ferrying other plates, with one ear tuned to the small sounds at his end of the counter. The scrape of mug on laminate, the tiny hitch when he swallowed. When Joe from the tire shop took the stool 2 down, Joe flung a casual, too loud question at him. "You homeless or just look like it?" Gabe said nothing. The eye contact he didn't make was a fortress. Maren was at Joe's elbow before she knew she meant to be. "You want the special, Joe? 2 eggs, 2 pancakes, and a slice of pie with a side of mind your own business." The joke landed. Laughter skittered across the counter, and Joe held up his hands in performative surrender. After that, the diner's sound found its normal key, knives dulling against plates, the low radio station that Roz, the manager, refused to change, and the occasional hiss of the grill like a cat reacting to news. When Maren set Gabe's eggs in front of him, he said thank you like a man used to the word being unnecessary. He ate as if careful not to disturb something in his chest.
He left halfway through lunch rush, without fanfare, a faint nod in her direction the moment he reached the door. The bell did its 2-note ding. He was gone. She found a $5 bill under his coffee mug. Maren stared. It wasn't the amount. It was the message. This wasn't a handout. This was a trade. A week is an elastic thing. It stretches thin when you're waiting for your paycheck to clear, then snaps back with a bruise when you're counting how to make rent happen with numbers that refuse to add up. Maren slept badly, worked hard, and practiced the small economies that didn't feel like defeat, mending the seam of a cardigan on our lunch break, standing in front of the grocery shelves calculating protein per dollar, choosing the olive green nail polish in the discount bin because it looked like a color that could keep its own secrets. Once, she took the long way home so she'd pass the motel. The room she'd paid for stood anonymous amid the others, same yellow curtain, same paint chips flaked off around the handle like scabs. She told herself that she did not own even the memory of her small good deed. You relinquish it, where it wasn't kindness. She walked on. On the seventh night, as dusk translated the town into its nighttime version, edges softened, failures forgiven by lack of light, Marin finished a double shift. Her feet ached like a chorus. She stepped out the back door into air that smelled of fryer oil and cut grass. She was snapping her ponytail free when she heard the engine. It did not belong to this block. It did not even belong to the highway where engines were meant to brag. This sound was controlled, groomed, a purr that had been taught to sit and lie down. The black SUV turned the corner like a piece in a game had just advanced 3 squares. Dark windows. Discreet antenna on the roof that said, "I am trying not to say something." Marin froze, a dish rag in her hand like a ridiculous flag of truce. The SUV glided to the curb, the passenger window lowering with a soft mechanical sigh. A woman in a simple navy blazer leaned out, her eyes doing a tidy read of Marin's face in a single pass. "Marin Albright?" the woman asked. The question had a period at the end, not a question mark. Marin heard her own voice betray her. "Depends who's asking." It came out wry. She wished she had said the line for a moment that didn't feel like the earth had just shifted half an inch under her shoes. The woman's mouth did a minimal courtesy of a smile. "Special Agent Ramirez," she said. "This is Agent Whitaker." She tilted her head toward the driver, a man whose profile looked stamped out of a handbook for how to look like authority without appearing like a caricature of it. "This about a ticket?" Marin asked, "because I swear the light was pink." "It's about a room you paid for," Ramirez said. Marin's throat tightened. She kept her face open, but her blood moved faster, sharpening her hearing so that she could tell the difference between the diner's back door hinge and the sewer grate belching its evening breath. "Okay," she said cautiously. "You covered a one-night stay last week at the Riverside Motel Lodge for a man you identified as Gabe." Ramirez's voice was uninflected, precise. "We believe you interacted with him again here at the diner." Marin's heart licked at her ribs. That wasn't the expression, but it felt right. Did he do something? Because if this is about a breakfast tab, Sergeant Gabriel Rios, United States Army, formerly 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry, honorable discharge, 2 tours. He paused just slightly. Missing person of interest in an active federal case. The words person of interest rearranged the world into different shapes. Marin swallowed. She felt Agent Ramirez watching the swallow with professional dispassion. "We are not here to accuse you of anything. On the contrary, you may have done exactly the right thing at exactly the right time. I bought a stranger a motel room. That's not exactly national security." "You might be surprised," Whitaker said evenly. "Can we talk? Somewhere not inhaling fryer vent?" Marin looked back at the diner's back door, at the narrow slice of fluorescent light and the sound of Roz's laugh bouncing off prep metal. Life in there was small and known and could be navigated with a coffee pot and a strong enough spine. The SUV was a portal to a different kind of weather. "Okay," she said, "but I have a shift at 8 tomorrow. If I don't show, Roz will send a search party with a rolling pin." "Understood," Ramirez said. "We'll make it quick." They did not make it quick. They asked to see where she'd first met Gabe. Marin found herself back in the hum of the motel office, the same flickering light doing its arthritic dance. The clerk smacked gum and time with his boredom and handed over the register with the enthusiasm of a man surrendering his grocery list. Agents took photos. They moved like muscle memory in suits. In the parking lot, Marin's phone made a discreet vibration. She glanced at the screen, and something in her face tightened. "He's moved," Ramirez said to Whitaker, and the sentence meant more than motion. "Who?" Marin asked, though she already knew. "Rios," Whitaker said from behind the wheel, his first contribution to the conversation landing like a brick that had been politely wrapped. "Looking for him how?" "The wrong way," Ramirez said. "We need to understand your interaction. Anything he said, anything he left. People like Rios don't do random. If he crossed your path, there's a reason. The reason wasn't an object you could hold up to the light. It felt like a pressure change in the room. Marin thought about the $5 bill under the coffee mug, the wary nod, the tremor in his right hand, the way he had said amen as if the word had bones. None of those were evidence that would satisfy an agent's spreadsheet. They were evidence that satisfied a person's gut.
"I have a receipt," Marin said. "From the motel. A duplicate the clerk gave me when his machine double-printed. I stuck it in my glove compartment because I stick everything in my glove compartment. Gum wrappers, apocalypse plans, you name it." "Can we see it?" Ramirez asked. They could. Marin pulled it from among expired insurance cards and a map of a county she hadn't meant to drive through. Ramirez held the receipt with both care and indifference, the way you hold a snake you're pretty sure is not venomous. She flipped it over. There was nothing there. Except the ink from the printer had left a faint shadow where it shouldn't, a smear that wasn't from the machine. It was as if a pencil had kissed the paper lightly in shorthand, then changed its mind. Ramirez angled it toward the SUV dome light. Whitaker produced, from somewhere, a small flashlight. The faint marks became not marks. They became choice. "Numbers," Whitaker said quietly. "Coordinates?" Ramirez offered. Marin looked closer. The smear was a series of digits separated by dots like a stuttering sentence. 34.762, 117.387, 31. She did not do coordinates. She did eggs. But numbers were still a kind of map. "Why would he put that on my receipt?" Marin asked. "Because it would be on your person without looking like a thing," Ramirez said. "Because a stranger's kindness is hard to track in a system that only counts transactions. Because he needed a dead drop fast, and your glove compartment is more secure than his pockets right now." The words dead drop had the indecency to sound cool. Marin's stomach dropped from a different altitude. "Who is the wrong way, looking for him?" she asked. "You said people were." Ramirez studied her for a beat, as if placing the right weight on the next words. "We're investigating a contracting fraud ring that siphoned millions from veteran medical supply procurement. Some of the products reached the field, some didn't. You can infer the rest. The rest being, people didn't get what they needed when they needed it." "Correct," Whitaker said. "Rios filed documentation, then disappeared 2 days later." "He didn't just disappear," Ramirez corrected gently. He reconfigured his path." "Went to ground," Whitaker translated, losing patience with euphemism. They drove. Marin didn't know where until the GPS voice said it for her. A lightless county road. The SUV's beams carved a tunnel into scrub and shadow. Whitaker turned onto a smaller track that wasn't a road so much as the memory of one. The coordinates had brought them to a place the map barely admitted existed. "Why am I here?" she asked. "Meaning, why bring a waitress whose net worth could be measured in broken $20 bills into whatever this is?" "Because he trusted you," Ramirez said simply. "And because trust is a better key than any we carry." It made no sense and all the sense at once. The track widened into a turnout where the bones of an old picnic table leaned into themselves. Someone had burned a fire here, recent enough that the circle of stones still collected warmth like a secret it hadn't decided to share. Whitaker swept the beam across the ground. The world went white, then black, like the inside of a photographer's shutter. Ramirez crushed by the fire ring. She said, "There." Marin sighed. A coffee can, blackened with soot, half tucked under a jut of rock. The lid lifted with the reluctant pop of something that had been told to keep its mouth shut. Inside, a single dog tag, a folded piece of paper the size of a playing card, and a key fob with a worn button. Ramirez touched none of it. She looked at Marin. "Would you?" she asked. "Me?" Marin's voice went up an octave she didn't approve of. "Trust," Ramirez said again, like that solved logistics. Marin reached into the can. The dog tag was cool, familiar in the way certain shapes are even if you haven't held them before. She read the stamped letters, Rios, Gabriel F, OPOS, a string of numbers. The paper unfolded into coordinates, this time unapologetic. The key fob had a white paint chip thumb rubbed into an oval. "What does it open?" Marin asked. "A storage unit? A vehicle?" Whitaker suggested, already pulling out a small notebook. Ramirez snapped a photo of the tag, the paper, the fob. The night watched, listening for mistakes. "Why would he put that on my receipt?" Marin asked. "Because it would be on your person without looking like a thing," Ramirez said. "Because a stranger's kindness is hard to track in a system that only counts transactions. Because he needed a dead drop fast, and your glove compartment is more secure than his pockets right now." The words dead drop had the indecency to sound cool. Marin's stomach dropped from a different altitude. "Who is the wrong way? Looking for him?" she asked. "You said people were." Ramirez studied her for a beat, as if placing the right weight on the next words. "We're investigating a contracting fraud ring that siphoned millions from veteran medical supply procurement. Some of the products reached the field, some didn't. You can infer the rest. The rest being, people didn't get what they needed when they needed it." "Correct," Whitaker said. "Rios filed documentation, then disappeared 2 days later." "He didn't just disappear," Ramirez corrected gently. He reconfigured his path." "Went to ground," Whitaker translated, losing patience with euphemism. They drove. Marin didn't know where until the GPS voice said it for her. A lightless county road. The SUV's beams carved a tunnel into scrub and shadow. Whitaker turned onto a smaller track that wasn't a road so much as the memory of one. The coordinates had brought them to a place the map barely admitted existed. "Why am I here?" she asked. Meaning, why bring a waitress whose net worth could be measured in broken $20 bills into whatever this is? "Because he trusted you," Ramirez said simply. "And because trust is a better key than any we carry." It made no sense and all the sense at once. The track widened into a turnout, where the bones of an old picnic table leaned into themselves. Someone had burned a fire here, recent enough that the circle of stones still collected warmth like a secret it hadn't decided to share. Whitaker swept the beam across the ground. The world went white, then black like the inside of a photographer's shutter. Ramirez crouched by the fire ring. She said, "There." Marin saw it. A coffee can, blackened with soot half tucked under a jut of rock. The lid lifted with the reluctant pop of something that had been told to keep its mouth shut. Inside was a single dog tag, a folded piece of paper the size of a playing card, and a key fob with a worn button. Ramirez touched none of it. She looked at Marin. "Would you?" she asked. "Me?" Marin's voice went up an octave she didn't approve of. "Trust," Ramirez said again. Like that solved logistics. Marin reached into the can. The dog tag was cool, familiar in the way certain shapes are, even if you haven't held them before. She read the stamped letters. Rios, Gabriel F. OPOS. A string of numbers. The paper unfolded into coordinates, this time unapologetic. The key fob had a white paint chip thumb-rubbed into an oval. "What does it open?" Marin asked. "A storage unit? A vehicle?" Whitaker suggested, already pulling out a small notebook. Ramirez snapped a photo of the tag, the paper, the fob. The night watched, listening for mistakes. "Why would he leave his tag?" Marin asked, more to herself and to them. "Because he doesn't need to be identified if the people getting to him are not the ones who will honor it. Because he wants us to know what's left if we don't succeed." Marin closed her fingers around the tag until the metal warmed. She recognized the old impulse to pray, and the newer impulse to weaponize the space where prayer would have been. She was not a soldier. She was a person who knew how to patch small things and who had paid for a room without asking why. They were back on the road when Whitaker noticed the headlights in the side mirror. He said, "We've got a tail." No panic, just notation. Something small and efficient woke up in him, clicked through options, made choices. He killed the dome light. Ramirez told Marin to clip the seatbelt low on her hips. Marin obeyed the voice that did not negotiate. The road allowed fewer choices than a city would. Whitaker took the one the road gave. He dropped the SUV to a speed the tail couldn't match without making a decision of its own, to pass or to fall back. The other car chose wrong. It sped up. Whitaker braked hard and pulled onto the shoulder as the tail veered alongside, momentum too committed to recalculate. In the second of parallax, Marin saw a driver's silhouette, a hat brim, and mouth speaking words she'd never hear. Then the world resolved. Whitaker slid back in behind them, now the tail. Ramirez spoke into a mic low on her lapel, voice transformed into a series of coordinates and codes. When they reached blacktop that owned its identity, the other car turned hard toward town. Whitaker let it go. He said, "Got the plate. They'll pick it up if they can. If they want to be picked up, which they won't." Ramirez said. She turned to Marin. "You okay?" Marin realized her fingers were still around the dog tag. The small circle of metal had imprinted its rim into her palm. "Yes," she lied, and the lie felt like the right kind of stewardship of her fear. She would ration it. She would not spend it all in one place.
"Let's get you home," Ramirez said. "Tomorrow we'll meet at 9. Bring the fob." "Tomorrow I have the morning shift," Marin said. "I can be late. I can't be fired." "We'll work around it," Ramirez said, and made it sound like they could bend time. The SUV delivered Marin to the stairwell behind the laundromat. The metal steps sang under her feet like a cheap xylophone. She paused at the landing, keys in her right hand because her father taught her that keys in your fist can be a weapon if they need to be. She opened the door. The room breathed out detergent and heat and the lemon cleaner she had diluted too much last week to make it last. She set the dog tag on the chipped saucer that served as a catch-all and stood at the window watching the street. The black SUV had become black absence. She tried to sleep. The thought of a stranger's trust on the saucer made the room feel crowded. When the dream came, it had no images, only weight, the sensation of a thing placed in her hands that was heavier than it looked. Morning came like a negotiation she hadn't finished. The diner wanted her body moving and her face friendly. The government wanted her memory organized. Her anxiety wanted everything at once. She showered in a spray that practiced optimism. She braided her hair tight like armor and went to the bus stop because the Corolla made a noise yesterday that sounded like a complaint she couldn't afford to answer. The diner was already in motion when she arrived. The bell's two-note ding happened whether she came or not. Raj shouted across the pass like a ship captain. Jaya, the other server, bumped her hip into Marin's the way friends do when hands are occupied and words would take too long. Marin moved into the groove, discovered that muscle memory is a kind of grace you don't have to deserve. The door chimed, and two men in suits sat at table 6, the one Marin thought of as the make-it-work table, because its wobble required skilled napkin shimming. The suits did not do coffee at first, they did water. Their eyes counted exits. Marin delivered menus in the smile that got her better tips and less trouble. "We're fine," one suit said, and the words were what words are, but Marin's lungs tightened. She didn't need to look to know that the other suit's right hand had found the place under his jacket where a gun lives. She took a breath and asked Jaya to cover table 6. She took table 9 instead, where Mr. Henley ate oatmeal and read the sports page with the solemnity of a man reading war updates. The suits left without ordering. Marin made it to the walk-in cooler before she let her knees have the small tremor they'd requested 6 minutes ago. She put her forehead to a crate of oranges and told herself the truth. This is bigger than you, but not beyond you. At 9, the black SUV did not pull up. A text buzzed instead. "Mechanical trouble, meet at noon. Bring the fob." Ramirez's number contained no name, just digits that pretended not to be federal. At 11:30, a boy Marin sometimes saw skateboarding outside slid into a booth and ordered pie with the seriousness teenagers assign to sugar. He left a napkin folded into a triangle under the coffee mug. Marin cleared the mug, and the napkin opened itself into a note without asking permission. "Don't go home alone." She scanned the street. The boy had gone. Across the road, a man with a hat brim dark as a swallowed moon glanced once, twice, then pretended to forget where he was. Fear skittered along Marin's spine like an animal that couldn't decide whether it was trapped. She texted Ramirez, "I think someone else is here first." The reply came 10 seconds later. "Stay inside, we're 2 minutes."
2 minutes is an hour when you are standing at a window pretending to polish a smudge that does not exist. When the SUV turned the corner, relief punched holes in the fear big enough to step through. Ramirez came in without ceremony. Whitaker did the perimeter check with his eyes and then with his body. "You get any messages?" Ramirez asked. Marin handed her the napkin. Ramirez's mouth tightened. "Not ours." She lowered her voice. "We go together. Grab your things." "My shift." Raj shouted across the pass like a ship captain. Jaya, the other server, bumped her hip into Marin's the way friends do when hands are occupied and words would take too long. Marin moved into the groove, discovered that muscle memory is a kind of grace you don't have to deserve. Roz appeared beside them like she had been conjured by concern. "You good?" she asked Marin, eyes slipping between the agents and her waitress like a dance she hadn't practiced but could fake. "I need to step out. I'll come back and—" "You come back when you come back. Bring me a story worth hearing and I'll consider it your tip." She flicked a glance at Ramirez that said, "I won't ask if you won't answer." They left by the back. The alley smelled like bread and diesel. The SUV's interior felt like a controlled climate, a weather guesser's victory. Whitaker drove. Ramirez spoke in a low stream to someone who responded only in her ear. "We identified the tail from last night," she said to Marin when she hung up. "Private contractor, the kind that puts the word solutions in their name when the solutions are none of your business."
"They want Rios because he has proof," Whitaker said. "Or because they want to remove the person who might testify there as proof. Or because he made someone look bad," Ramirez added. "And in some places, that's the only crime." "Where are we going?" Marin asked. Ramirez held up the fob. "To see if this opens something. The coordinates point to a storage facility on the east edge of nowhere." Nowhere announced itself as low buildings with fewer windows than dignity, and a chain-link fence whose razor wire had opinions. The office had a bell that asked to be pushed with a kind of despair. The clerk had a mustache that looked like it missed the 70s. Whitaker did the talking with a politeness that felt like its own badge. They signed things that would bind them to liabilities should the building fall on their heads. Then the three of them followed the corridor of corrugated doors to a unit with a number that matched the paper, and, astonishingly, the fob blinked a modest green when Whitaker pressed it. He lifted the roll-up door with the efficiency of a man lifting a version of the future. Inside, neatness, which is its own kind of truth. A duffel bag, squared and stacked. A banker's box with a crack along one seam repaired with duct tape and a military X. A wooden ammo crate repurposed into something more innocent and therefore more suspicious. Ramirez waited. "Marin?" she said again, and Marin realized they were asking her to be the hands. "Why me?" "Because of trust? Because if this is booby-trapped, we want the person he meant to open it to be the one who opens it, which is still trust, I guess." Marin knelt by the duffel. She unzipped with the slowness of someone unwrapping a fragile gift from a past she hadn't asked to inherit. Clothing, rolled tight and practical. A toothbrush. A battered book of psalms with a corner folded down so often that the paper had begun to break. In the side pocket, a flip phone so old it was practically an artifact, and a laminated card with a number printed larger than the rest. "Emergency," she read aloud. Or the illusion of it. The banker's box had folders, manila bleached by time and fluorescent light and worry. Receipts, contract numbers, shipment manifests with lines through the items that never reached anyone who needed them. Tabs labeled in small square handwriting. Vendor A, Vendor B, Shellco West. Whitaker hovered at her shoulder but did not crowd. Ramirez watched the corridor mouth with the predator's attention and a guardian's patience. Inside the ammo crate, something wrapped in a t-shirt. Marin peeled back cotton. Dog tags again, but older, their edges nicked by life. A Polaroid nested against the metal, 3 men in uniforms, sand in the background, someone's arm flung around someone else's shoulder with the kind of casual ownership friendship earns in the field. The man on the left was Gabe. He looked younger by a decade, and by a gravity's worth of sorrow not yet accrued. The man in the middle, Marin's breath failed, then returned as a different shape. The man in the middle was her father. "No," she whispered, then louder because the word would not stop. "No." Whitaker looked at the photo. Ramirez looked at Marin. "You know him," Ramirez said, and it was gentler than a question.
"My father," Marin said, and the air thinned to the consistency of a confession. I never saw this." She held the photo like it might bite or bless. Ramirez let the silence hold them upright. "That explains the trust," she said quietly, "or part of it." Marin moved her thumb and discovered handwriting on the white Polaroid margin, a scrawl that had the insistence of a message delivered late. "When you meet her, tell her I kept my word. Gr." "How?" Marin began and surrendered the rest of the question because it had no mouth yet. Her father had served. He had been the kind of man whose decency refused to perform itself. He never told war stories, not because there weren't any, but because the ones worth telling were too heavy to hand to someone else. Ramirez's phone vibrated with insistence. She stepped away to answer. When she returned, her face had changed in the way faces change when the news is not news so much as a narrowing of choices. "They're here," she said. "Who?" Marin asked, but she knew. The alley suits with the missing coffee order, the hat-brim man who looked at the door like it owed him something. "Another car just crossed the back lot," Whitaker said, checking the external camera feed on a unit they hadn't asked permission to use. "We need to move." He closed the box and lifted it like a thing that would change the weight of his arm later. Ramirez offered Marin the ammo crate. Marin took it because there was no pretending this wasn't hers now in some terrible and exact way.
The roll-up door rattled closed. Whitaker tapped the lock in place. They made it to the bend in the corridor when the silhouette appeared at the mouth of the corridor. The man wore the hat. He wore the smile of someone who'd already decided how this ends and was just performing the steps. He lifted his hands like peace, showed them empty palms, then revealed the gun like a magic trick. "Let's all relax," he said conversationally. "Boxes on the floor." Whitaker moved first, a shift in stance that made him thinner and wider at once. Ramirez angled a half step in front of Marin without Marin registering the move until it had happened. The hat-brim man's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a snarl. "Heard there's a fellow owes us a hello in there," he said, nodding at the unit door as if Gabe might step out with a cake. "You're trespassing," Whitaker said, and it was almost funny for its smallness in the face of the gun's bigness. "I'm making a house call," the man said, service with a smile. He advanced 2 steps. "Boxes." Marin put the crate down slowly. It hit the concrete with the small official sound of wood meeting a decision. She kept her foot on the handle because her father had taught her small things matter, and sometimes a foot is the difference between a box that slides toward a man with a gun and a box that delays. Ramirez noticed her foot. She altered her stance a hair's breadth toward advantage. "What do you want?" Ramirez asked, voice even. "Same thing you do, to tidy up." "Funny," Whitaker said. "Our kind of tidy and your kind tend to look different." The man's eyes flickered to Marin and then back. The look had the effect of a hand pressed against a window between them. Not touching, pressing anyway. "You," he said to her, as if he'd remembered her from a file. "You bought a room. Real sweet. You like to help, do you?" Marin did not answer. Her face had adopted the neutral gravity it kept for customers who believed they were better storytellers than they were. "Here's how we help," the man went on, his voice the wheedle of someone who learned how to narrate violence in a way that made it sound like a favor. "You slide those boxes over. You forget any of this, like a dream you had about a thing that isn't yours, and we don't have to make your day any worse." Marin felt for fear and placed it carefully on a shelf where it could watch and not run the room. She saw the way Ramirez's left hand had drifted to the jacket seam where a weapon lived, not to draw, but to remind the hand what it was for. She saw Whitaker's shoulders settle. She saw the reflection of the man's gun in a dull spot on the corrugated metal so she could tell the exact angle it pointed without looking at it. Her father had taught her to read the second-best mirror in a room. Then another sound arrived, a door rolling up somewhere behind them, the echo of metal on track, a second silhouette in the distant rectangle of light. 2 becomes 3, becomes more. The math did not resolve in their favor. "Now," the hat-brim man said, not louder, just editable. Ramirez's radio crackled once with a code Marin didn't understand. Whitaker shook his head a bare fraction. The corridor air condensed. The man's gun did not waver. Marin's foot did not move from the crate handle. "Please," Marin said, and her voice surprised them all. It was the tone you use to keep a drunk from making a mistake with the pool cue he thinks is a sword. The man's eyes cut to her. Marin took the half-inch his curiosity gave her and put the whole weight of her humanity into it. "You don't have to do this. There's your story. There's mine. There's his." She nodded toward the room where a younger Gabe and her father smiled from a photograph. "But there's also everything that happens if you pick the wrong ending. People who had nothing to do with your contract will bleed for it. You know that." The man's mouth hardened. "Sweetheart, the bleeding already happened. I'm in the business of stopping it from reaching the wrong ledger." The second silhouette became a person. He held a crowbar. He smiled like the first man smiled, had been practicing for this one. It happened at once and also over a long, patient minute. Whitaker's hand moved. The gun lifted. Ramirez pushed Marin toward the wall with the force that felt like the body remembering a dance. The crowbar man took 3 quick steps forward. The hat-brim man sighted. Whitaker shot first. The corridor exploded into sound and dust and the smell of something metallic that was not a smell, but an understanding. Marin dropped behind the crate because her body chose for her. Splinters leapt from wood like angry fish. The hat-brim man barked a curse between his teeth. The crowbar slammed into the crate lid where Marin's hand had been. Wood split, yawning like a mouth. The photograph skittered out, face down.
Marin ran. She lifted the photo because some compulsion about memory made her do it even then, and she ran, the corridor blurring into a single long breath. The roll-up door at the far end gaped a horizontal smile of daylight. She aimed at it, as fundamental as a moth. Behind her, footsteps, gunshots, commands whose words lost meaning in the wash of their urgency. She made the daylight, and then she didn't, because a figure stepped into the square of sky and body. He wore neither a hat nor smile. He held the door with one hand and a gun with the other, and he looked at Marin with the bored sorrow of someone tidying the last loose end of a list. He drew a breath like a decision. "Marin!" Ramirez's voice snapped the air. The world collected into a single hinge. The door, the gun, the photo in her hand, the dog tag in her pocket, the word L on a key that wanted a lock, the sticky, thick regret that she had dragged Roz's napkin shims into a story with federal edges, the memory of her father's small, private grin, and the animal certainty that if she stopped, the gun would make her still forever. She pivoted. The gunshot tore the air where her chest had been. Another answered it from behind. The conversation of bullets deciding jurisdiction. She dove toward the stack of pallets, wood teeth ready to bite. A hand grabbed her elbow and hauled. Not kind, not cruel, just exact. She did not scream, because screaming would take air she needed for running. They were inside again. The corridor had become a tunnel to a door she hadn't seen, because why would she? And Whitaker had a shoulder that would bruise tomorrow because he used it to break the bar of light that was a latch. The bar gave. The door opened on a back lot with weeds that had forgotten how to be weeds and now were something else. Ambushes, maybe. They ran through them. The SUV blinked to life with a chirp that sounded indecently cheerful. The engine said hello. Marin clutched the photograph and the key and the dog tag and everything that had made her run. They were moving when the man in the hat appeared in the side mirror again, smaller, angrier, a punctuation mark that would not be ignored. He didn't shoot. He watched the SUV leave with a calm so complete it was its own threat. "Everyone in one piece?" Whitaker asked. "Define peace," Marin said. Her voice shook, then settled. "I have the photo." She held it up. "Priorities," Ramirez said. And there was a smile in her voice that wasn't about joy, but about choosing what is not despair. She took the picture, turned it over, read the words again aloud because sometimes you must remind the present what the past promised. "When you meet her, tell her I kept my word. Gr." "What word?" Marin asked. The question hung like a rain you can smell before it falls. "We'll ask him," Ramirez said, "when we find him." They did not go to Marin's apartment. They went to a safe place that was called something else. It was a small house with curtains that said family and corners that said federal. Ramirez made tea because tea is the thing you make when coffee feels like an escalation. Whitaker stood by the window and looked like a shadow that had learned manners. "Who else did he mention in your father's stories?" Ramirez asked gently. "He didn't tell stories, not the kind with names or moments that make sense to other people. He said things like, 'Hold the flashlight higher,' and 'Don't leave wet boots by the door,' and 'Some promises light a path you can't see until you're on it.'" He hesitated. "He did say one name once, Lyle, but that was a dog as far as I knew." "L," Ramirez said softly, touching the taped key. "Maybe not a dog." Whitaker's phone buzzed. He stepped into the other room. Ramirez poured tea into a mug with a yellow chip on the rim that the kitchen kept as a reminder that chips are not disqualifying. Marin held the mug the way Gabe had held the coffee, for heat and for the reminder that heat can be born. Whitaker returned. "We ran the plate. Contractor tied to a shell that ties to another shell that ties to a board member who once chaired a nonprofit for veterans that never filed a single tax return. So the word shell is doing a lot of work," Marin said, because sarcasm sometimes wears an oxygen mask. "We also ran that coordinate extension." Ramirez tapped the folded paper. "It tails to a county storage for impounds and evidence 2 towns over. The key with the L might be a locker there, or it might be something old he stashed in a place nobody connects to him. Or it might be a person," Marin said suddenly, breath catching up with thought. "L could be a person." "Initials are democratic," Ramirez allowed. "They'll stand for whatever needs to be stood for until we make them specify." Whitaker's gaze flicked to the window, then to the clock, then to Ramirez. It was the triangle of looks people exchange when the plan has to become real or become a memory of a plan people once had. "Let's go," he said. "Where?" Marin asked. "To the place that stores other people's secrets," Ramirez said. "It's time we saw if your key fits." They didn't take the freeway. They stitched together the back roads the way you sew a wound you hope won't show in the scar. The county facility sat behind 2 fences and a belief in itself. A clerk looked at them like they were interrupting a game of patience. Whitaker showed a badge that wasn't quite the badge it looked like. Doors open for them the way doors open for people who seem to know where they're going. The lockers lived in a basement that smelled of humidity and old paper and things that want to be forgotten when forgetting is a luxury nobody can afford. Ramirez ran her fingers along rows of keys like a pianist warming up. Marin held the key marked L and told herself a small, ordinary story about boxes and locks to keep the extraordinary one from spinning too fast. They found it because the world sometimes leaves clues where people who still care can stumble on them. L13. The number had no poetry, it had only purpose. Marin slid the key into the lock. It turned like it had been waiting for her. Inside, another crate, smaller, a metal case the color of rainwater, 2 envelopes sealed with the unconvincing severity of glue, and a notebook that had been written in a hand that practice makes legible, even in a truck bouncing over bad roads. Ramirez did the camera thing, Whitaker did the container evaluating thing, Marin did the breathing thing. She opened the first envelope because the room had decided that would be the next right thing. Inside, a letter addressed to the daughter of Staff Sergeant Howard Albright, the one with the serious eyes who holds the flashlight high. Marin's lungs forgot how. The paper did not. She read, "If this finds you, it means I have not. It means a promise."
The handle turned and the door opened on its own weight. Not a rush, not a slam. Just the decision of metal that had been asked a question and finally answered. A man stepped through, and for a fraction of a second, Marin's fear mistook him for the hat-brimmed ghost from the storage unit. Then the light found his face. No hat. Beard a day past tidy, eyes the winter sea gray that had watched the diner's coffee steam like a weather report. Gabe. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. He lifted his hands, palms out. Empty. The quiet in the locker room felt fragile as blown glass. Whitaker's stance shifted a hair, the gun already drawn but angled toward the floor. Ramirez did not lower hers.
The fluorescent tubes hummed like insects deciding whether to land. "You took your time," Gabe said softly, voice rasped by disuse. His eyes went to Marin first. He didn't glance off her like a problem or a bystander. He looked at her like the next move lived with her, not the guns or the badges. "We showed our work," Ramirez said, not lowering the weapon. "The tail wasn't yours." He kept his hands up. 2 cars, 4 men. I counted at least that by the way the shadows fell on the back cameras. "You shook them?" "For now," Whitaker said. "Closers are patient." Gabe nodded once, a soldier's punctuation. His gaze returned to Marin, dipped to her hands as if to confirm she was whole. She realized she was still holding the letter addressed to her and the key with the taped L. She felt suddenly like a child caught carrying medicine home in both hands, the mission fragile and important and embarrassingly visible. "You shouldn't be here for me," he said to her. No accusation, just architecture, the way a wall shouldn't be standing if the foundation has cracked. "You put me here," Marin said, surprising herself with the absence of tremor in her voice, "on purpose." She lifted the letter a fraction, and a long time before that. He absorbed the truth of that, and something in his shoulders gave a small centimeter. "Howard?" he asked. "My father." "Yes." "She has the photo. The one you labeled." Gabe's throat moved. He lowered his hands an inch, then again when neither gun wavered. "I didn't think it would be you who found it," he said to Marin, the words more wonder than strategy. "I thought it would be a lawyer in a room that smells like carpet cleaner." "Plans seldom survive rooms," Whitaker said. Gabe's eyes moved to the metal case on the shelf behind them. "Is the hard drive still inside?" "Locked." "Good. If they'd gotten it open, someone would already be dead who isn't yet." "How about we leave before we have to test that theory?" Whitaker suggested. The footsteps above had quieted, but quiet can be a lullaby and a lie. He slid a glance across the cinder blocks, measuring how sound travels in buildings that were built to keep it in. Gabe nodded toward the notebooks and envelopes. "There's one more. Bottom of the locker, false floor. They always forget that the old design kept one." Ramirez gestured with the barrel. "Show me." He crossed the tile with the careful confidence of a man who understands what happens when you assume a room is yours. He knelt, pressed a thumb into a hairline crack at the locker's base, and pried up a thin sheet of metal no thicker than a playing card. Beneath it sat a flash drive sealed in a plastic sleeve and folded length of cloth wrapped around something small and geometric. Gabe didn't touch them. He looked at Marin. "This is yours," he said. "Mine?" She swallowed. "I am a waitress who knows how to shim cable six and keep drunk men from turning pool cues into swords. You're also Howard's daughter, and you paid for a room when nothing about your own ledger said you had space for it. That's the kind of surplus I trust." Ramirez took the drive with 2 gloved hands and slid it into an evidence pouch. She nodded at the cloth bundle. Marin reached. The fabric had been a t-shirt once. Now it was a message. Inside lay a brass locket, its surface dented into character by the years. It was old enough to be a family joke and important enough to not be a joke at all. "Your dad found that wedged behind a barracks sink in Balad. We used to make up stories about it on nights when the shrapnel was quiet. Said whoever it belonged to would show up right when the war tried to follow us home." He met her eyes. "I'm out of better omens."
The door at the top of the stairs squealed. 1 footstep, 2, then another, slower, as if whoever was up there had decided to grow careful. Whitaker's gun rose a degree. Ramirez's chin dipped, guardian and threat in the same small bone of motion. "Time," Whitaker said, a clock carved into a word. They moved. The items went into bags that made such things disappear without promising to erase what they meant. Gabe took the lead through a side corridor. He moved the way people move when they already met the bad thing once and didn't make it respect them, but made it at least count them. A service door opened onto a concrete ramp. Afternoon had settled into the mild, anonymizing light that makes surveillance cameras honest and everything else look like it was trying too hard. They descended. Whitaker pressed his key fob. The black SUV winked awake like a trained animal. A white cargo van ghosted past at the top of the drive, windows painted, patience humming. The van did not stop. It noted. Noting is its own stop. Inside the SUV, the doors thunked shut like a sanctuary learning to spell. Whitaker threaded them through a labyrinth of chain link, badge sliders, and guardhouse smiles with too many teeth. When the last fence let them out into public road, Ramirez exhaled in a single controlled measure, as if she'd been running a mile that was all corners. "How long do we have before they know we're holding the case?" she asked Gabe. "They already know," he said. "They inventoried the unit 2 nights ago. They did it with a camera and a promise to themselves about what they'd remember. They plan to come today with a warrant accident." "What's a warrant accident?" Marin asked. "Paperwork that lands just after a door opens. Then the story becomes that you were never here, or you were here the wrong way, or you were here because you did a bad thing for a good reason, which is still a belt around your neck." "Charming," Whitaker muttered. "Effective," Gabe corrected. They drove for a while. Roads behaved, then didn't. Whitaker made a few choices that looked like whim and tasted like calculus. Nobody followed, or someone followed well. The sun slouched toward the horizon like a boxer aching toward his corner. They did not go to the small safe house with domestic curtains. They went deeper into the city's underlayer, to a former union hall whose bones had been rebar and argument. Now it was offices that smelled like photocopiers and stubbornness. Ramirez badged them in. A young analyst with hair in a tight coil and a gaze like a level said hello, without asking which version of the truth they carried. "Eloise," Ramirez said, touching the analyst's shoulder. "We're running the drive and the ledger. We need isolation and a clean room. Also 2 more layers of the kind of paranoia that wins awards." "You got it," Eloise said. She met Marin's eyes and something like actual recognition moved through her face. Not the professional kind, but the human kind that says, "I see that you did a thing you didn't have to." "Coffee?" she offered. "Tea," Marin said, surprised to hear herself ask. "The kind that tastes like somebody somewhere grew leaves in peace." Eloise smiled. "We keep a jar for when we need to believe in that." Gabe stood at the corner of the conference table like a man who didn't sit because sitting would have told his bones the truth about how tired they were. He watched Eloise power up a laptop inside a plastic tent that made the machine look like a contagious patient. Whitaker made calls that turned short sentences into motion elsewhere. Ramirez wrote on a legal pad in block letters that didn't waste curves. "You should sleep," Gabe said to Marin, without taking his eyes off the tent. "You shake when you're tired. Hides as a laugh sometimes." "I'm not shaking," Marin said, then realized she was, and that he wasn't correcting her so much as giving her back permission to have a body. He took off his jacket. The scar at his jaw caught a line of light and turned it into a geography. He said nothing about it. She said nothing about the line on her forearm she'd earned from a drunk's ring when he'd grabbed and she'd twisted his fingers backward until the grabbing stopped. "We decorate our stories in self-defense." Eloise made a noise that was not quite a yes and not quite a curse. Encrypted. But the old-fashioned kind that assumes the person breaking it won't have a picture of the person who wrote it in their head. "What does that mean?" Marin asked. "It means he wrote the key for himself, which means he wrote it for someone who knows him, which I'm going to pretend is me until it is. And if it isn't, you're going to tell me what you told the person in your head." She glanced at Gabe, eyes kind. Gabe gave a half smile, like a memory, then began to talk in the slow, precise way of someone building a bridge while walking across it. He told Eloise about the way he dated things, always the mission first and the gear last, because gear reminded him of the failures most. He told her that he used psalm numbers the way other people use birthdays. He told her that when you've been shelled, you get superstitious, even if you're a rational man, and his superstition was to count in 7s until his heart slowed. Eloise nodded, fingers making a winter of key clicks. The first file opened like a reluctant eye. Inside, not photographs, but stitched together maps with points of light where procurement shipments had diverged from where they said they'd go. Each point carried a date, a vendor name, a manifest that lied, and a second manifest that told the truth to a private server someone thought was their own echo.
St. Luke's, Eloise read. Supposed to receive 40 boxes of burn dressings. Received 5. 35 rerouted to a warehouse in San Bernardino labeled ceramics. Not fucking ceramics, Whitaker said softly. Language, Eloise said without looking up. Your mic might be live. He grunted. It was approximately an apology. Can we move on them, the contractors? Ramirez asked Gabe. We can move and we can move on, but the window between those two movements is where we get shot at.
We need a warrant a judge will bless, even if he goes home to read the Wall Street Journal like scripture, Ramirez said. Then we need a civilian who can talk like a citizen, and a soldier who can talk like a man who has seen where the paper ends and the blood begins, Eloise said, eyes flicking between Marin and Gabe. I talk with coffee, Marin said, and the last courtroom I was in had a ketchup stain on the carpet. Juries care about ketchup stains if you point them out, Eloise replied. It's honesty without asking permission. Gabe looked at Marin. You don't owe this, he said. I don't owe many things I do, she said. They still feel like mine. He accepted that. Men like him know the currency of debt and the different thing that is duty. They worked until the hours felt like beads on a string that had been knotted too many times. Eloise opened file after file, each a ledger of theft disguised as paperwork. Ramirez and Whitaker threaded those into affidavits made of nouns and verbs hard enough to stand without adjectives leaning on them. Marin made calls to people who didn't answer and to one person who did, Roz, because you tell someone when you may not come in tomorrow, and you tell them the truth without telling them anything classified. Bring me a story worth hearing, Roz said again, sleep bird and fierce. I'll save you a slice. Of pie? Of the kind of day you'll want to remember. At 3 a.m, Eloise sat back. We have it, she said simply. Not the whole cathedral, but enough of the pillars that when we knock, something falls. We serve at 7, we hit the warehouse at 8, we expect company at 8:05. Which warehouse? Gabe asked. San Bernardino, Riverside Cross Street, she said. The kind of building that's been 5 kinds of sins with the paint barely changed. Gabe's jaw worked. They like that corner. Lines of sight are better than they should be. Street lights dead 2 poles down. The city never fixes it. You ever think about being a pessimist professionally? Whitaker asked. It's optimism if you believe your enemy will be as lazy as they were last time, Gabe said. They didn't sleep. They did the next thing, which is sometimes more restful than rest. At 6:30, Whitaker ran a hand over his face like he was shaving with memory. Ramirez packed a bag that was a compromise between court and conflict. Eloise put on sneakers that looked like peace and moved like war. Marin went to the bathroom and listened to the building's pipes talk to one another. She looked at herself in the mirror. She didn't recognize the woman who looked back, and recognized her exactly anyway. She braided her hair again. She tucked a locket into her pocket because certain superstitions make room for themselves. She slid the dog tag on its chain around her neck under her shirt. Warm metal became a new idea of a spine. They rolled out in 2 vehicles and a plan. Team 1 was Whitaker and local law with humorless eyes and clean uniforms. Team 2 was Ramirez, Eloise, a second analyst named Dev whose calm looked like a lake, and Marin and Gabe. They would go through a door that had not consented. They would say words that compelled consent anyway. Dawn held its breath. The city coughed a bus awake. Pigeons assessed their options. Whitaker's voice in the comms, go. The warehouse door did the metal scream thing doors do when they resent being asked to do business at an hour sacred to birds and bakers. Inside, a wide mouth of space and the sorts of stacks that pretend they're boxes and are actually a maze. The word ceramics printed in blue on 8 pallets like a joke told by a sociopath. 2 men at a table looked up, the way men look when the wrong sort of early arrived. Federal warrant, Ramirez said.
voice that could teach verbs to stand straight. Hands where we can see them. The men did not put their hands where anyone could see them. One man bolted. Dev's body decided for him that this was a bad choice. A grapple, a shift, a zip tie like punctuation. The other man smiled like a snake exegeting scripture and went very still. Eloise was already slicing shrink wrap. Marin helped because helping is how she keeps from shaking. Under the plastic, not ceramics. Branded boxes for bone saws, ultrasound gel by the case, tourniquets. A fact too sharp to touch without gloves, it had all been here while someone somewhere bled without it. Photograph everything before we breathe too hard, Ramirez said.
Gabe moved along the edges, eyes skimming for the wrongness that doesn't show up on manifests. He found it near the back, a mezzanine level with an office window that had shade film on the inside, not outside. Advantage? Whoever was in the office. He pointed, and Whitaker nodded, taking 2 of the uniforms up the stairs like he was auditioning for silence. Shots. 3. Not the endless routine rattle of the wrong wars. The deliberate punctuation of a present sentence that wanted to end. Whitaker's voice followed. Clear. Then a curse that meant it wasn't, and a second order that meant he would make it be. A man came out with his hands up, shirt freshly expensive, hair recently perfect. No hat. The expression of someone who had never met being told no by a person with less money but more authority and taken it personally. Board member, Eloise said, checking a photo on her phone. Name with a charity in it, face with a camera in it when the mayor cuts ribbons. The man smiled for the room. Good morning, he said as if auditioning to host. Shall we be reasonable? Let's be recorded, Ramirez said flatly. He saw Gabe then. He saw the winter gray in his eyes and what it had seen. Something in the man's mouth tightened. Not fear, not respect, something less honest. Annoyance at the difficulty of a thing he had expected to be easy. You, he said, like the word tasted bad. You filed paperwork. I did my job. You endangered careers, he corrected gently, which is how some men say threat. Careers can bleed. I've seen it. It's different than when people do. The man's smile deepened, like a shovel sinks further. This will embarrass very important people, he murmured, eyes on Ramirez now. They will make decisions about your budget while holding that embarrassment. Then I hope they like embarrassment, Ramirez said. It comes in cases of 40. She gestured at the pallets. Would you like to count? He didn't. He watched Marin instead, as if trying to place where she fit into the narrative he liked to be the narrator of. You, he said after a beat. You're not federal. Neither is decency, but it still shows up for work. She laughed once, delighted in her own surprise, then chose boredom like a coat. Are we done? He asked the room. I have a meeting at 10. You have an arraignment at 10, or a holding cell with bad coffee. Dealer's choice. Teams fanned into parts. Photographing, cataloging, doing the work that turns a bad story into a record that can survive enemies and lawyers. Eloise sealed the hard drive into a bag. Then another bag, as if redundancy could appease chaos. Dev read the man his rights with the kind of careful respect that makes men like him furious because it denies them the gift of victimhood. The solutions men didn't come in a wave like the movie version. They came in ones and twos, then a truck with a logo that pretended to be moving companies and actually moved other people's money. By then, the place was a hive of vests and voices and murmuration. The truck turned away after seeing the number of vests. Cowardice is efficient when it's salaried. By 10, the judge had read the affidavit and discovered he did not, in fact, have to go home to the Wall Street Journal for his opinions. He could form one that smelled like the morning's coffee and the taxpayer's breath. He signed the warrant on an iPad, because sin adapts, and so must law. Arrests continued. Phones rang.
People began to tell the kind of lies that are really auditions for smaller sentences. Marin watched someone wheel a pallet of tourniquets toward a government truck and felt a heat behind her ribs that wasn't adrenaline for once. Joy is a difficult suspicion to maintain without proof. Here was proof, shrink-wrapped and stamped and undeniable. They didn't find everything. You never do. The story never closes all its windows. But they took enough to pull a building down to its studs and show the neighbors what had been going on behind the drywall. At noon, they sat in the Union Hall again. Coffee steamed. Eloise killed the laptop with ceremony. Whitaker stacked copies of forms the way a mason stacks bricks. Ramirez rubbed the bridge of her nose and looked at Gabe the way a general looks at a soldier who was both trouble and the reason you can sleep. "There's still a hole," Eloise said. "The money went through 3 shells and then somewhere we can't see because they used flesh instead of paper." The board member's son, Whitaker guessed. Or a cousin, or a childhood friend with an LLC and a boat. "The L," Marin said, all the threads landing in one letter. "A locker. A person." Ramirez's head came up. "Say it again." "L," Marin repeated, tapping the key on the table. "He marked it. He kept the key because the lock is a person you meet in a place like a county storage room where nobody asks why you know your way around."
"Who?" Eloise asked. Her voice didn't push. It placed chairs around an idea and invited it to sit. Marin reached for the locket. It had warmed to her, or her to it. She thumbed the dent the way you do when you are teaching your hand the shape of a thing so your mind can remember it later. She clicked it open. Inside, not a photograph as she'd expected, but a curl of paper folded small. She eased it out. Letters too tiny to be comfortable lay there like ants building a map. Lyle. "Not a dog," she said, and her breath left her with the word. Lyle. Gabe closed his eyes as if he'd been bracing for a punch he'd known was coming but couldn't afford to flinch at. Lyle Jenner. Our driver. Ballad. Did 3 tours in convoy. He laughed like he was borrowing the sound. Disappeared 3 years ago. Not past tense, disappeared as a verb someone did to him. Alive? Ramirez asked softly. "If he is, he's doing the kind of alive that hurts," Gabe said. He knew routes. He knew who owed who. He was the kind of man the wrong people call when they don't want to leave voicemails. "Can we find him?" Marin asked. "We can try," Eloise said. She was already typing, the sound a small rain. "We start with the VA records that don't exist. We look for a man who appears as a shadow in other people's reports. We search for a truck that never got paid for at a dealership that claims it never sold to him. We also ask around," Whitaker said, "in the places where asking is currency. Or we let him find us," Gabe said, "which is the part of the plan I hate." "Why would he?" Marin asked. "Because if the ring is breaking, they will go for the softest point to reinforce it," he said. "They think that's you. They're wrong, but they haven't been introduced properly to your spine." He glanced away, fought for evenness, then lost gently. "And because I left a message for him a year ago in a place the wrong people finally learned to look." "What message?" Ramirez asked. "If you're done running, come home." And a number he could call through 4 relays that would land with me. He pointed at the flip phone from the storage unit. "That one." He never called. "He will now," Whitaker said. "He might, if he is still himself. If he's not, someone else will." The phone rang like an object from another decade trying to be relevant. Everyone in the room watched it, and the watching was so intense that the sound seemed to come from inside the listening, rather than from the table. It rang again. Nobody moved. Eloise reached first. She flipped it open because that is how this model asked to be treated, with deference and force. "Hello," she said, and her voice did not waver. Silence. then a breath that sounded like it had been measured in miles. "Is he there?" a voice asked. Male, hoarse sand, the syllables cracked on the edges of their own shapes. "Who should I say is calling?" "Tell him his ghost," the voice said, and the word was both joke and confession. Gabe stepped forward and took the phone. "Lyle." No question. The name turned the room different. The voice on the other end had the unsteady careful of someone walking on broken glass. "You made a mess," he said. "I cleaned up yours." "Fair," Lyle replied after a beat, and Marin could hear a smile that had forgotten how to be a smile. "I got 2 minutes before somebody in a car outside decides to earn their gas stipend walking in for cigarettes." "Where?" Ramirez mouthed. Gabe held up a hand. "Do not spook him." "You heard they're moving the last of it tonight? The old cannery by the river, the one with the broken red sign that keeps promising beans?" I coughed, the kind that sounded like it had rust at the bottom. "They're going to burn it afterward, no evidence. The new judge grew a spine last year, and they learned to hate that kind of architecture." "Can you leave?" Gabe asked. A laugh that wasn't a laugh. "You know how it is when your leash is made of math. If I go, somebody's baby gets touched. They keep a ledger. They're very precise men." "Then we'll come to you," Gabe said. "Bring whoever you pray to, and a fire truck."
The line died. Not a click. A disappearance. Ramirez exhaled. "Old cannery," she repeated. "We have 10 like that within 50 miles. "The beans thing," Marin said, heart pacing, mind assembling a map from memory and rumor. "There's a rusted sign where M and S fell off, and the een flickers. Bean, bin. Once it spelled beans and feed. Now it just says B-E-D if the wind is wrong." She swallowed. "My dad used to fish behind it. Said the catfish there tasted like battery acid." Eloise pulled up a satellite image. "There," she said. And the photo offered a rectangular roof with patches like old bandages, a loading dock, a road that pretended to be paved. "We can get a team in 10, the fire department in 12. The part where we make sure Lyle doesn't get shot by either side is the trick." "Not if he's with me," Gabe said. "And her," Marin said, not because she wanted heroics, but because she knew what a familiar face can do for a frightened animal, and what it can do for a man who has become one. "You don't need to," Gabe began. "I need to," she said. "You dragged me into the river. We finished the crossing." They drove. Lights dark, sirens off, radios crackling in the other cars with the sound like rain, if rain learned code. The cannery rose out of the river fog like a shape the town had been trying to not admit it still contained. The sign did the flicker. B-A-E-D. Marin wanted to laugh at the bleak comedy and couldn't find room to put the laugh. Teams took positions. Whitaker coordinated with fingers and brows and the small, authoritative sweep of a hand that means go without ever saying the word. Ramirez looked at Marin. "You stay behind me," she said. "If I stop, you stop. If I tell you to crawl, you're going to learn what your knees are for." "Understood," Marin said. Her knees already knew. Life had taught them. Gabe moved low along the loading dock, counting bolts like he counted breaths. He found a side door. He pointed. Ramirez nodded. Dev and another agent braced. Eloise waited by the van, listening to feeds and heartbeat patterns nobody else could hear. Whitaker's go came like a thought you have before you know you thought it. Inside, the smell of old beans and new lies. The cavern of a floor stacked with pallets in the dark, the path between them a logic problem written by a thief. At the far end, a glow, and voices, men talking with the self-assurance of people who only ever hear yes. "After this, we're clean," a voice that carry. "We go back to the ribbon cuttings, they'll thank us for our service." "Service this," another voice said, which passes for humor among certain men. Ramirez moved like shadow with purpose attached. Whitaker's team flowed along the spine of the building. Someone dropped a box with a sound that told the room's secrets. Silence. Then the scrabbling sound men make when they meet consequences and decide to run anyway. "Federal agents!" Whitaker's voice rode the length of the room and set up flags. Hands! The rest of the command drowned in gunfire and motion. Marin flattened, the floor's grit pressing a map onto her palms. Gabe touched her shoulder, small, exact, a comma in a sentence she still had to read. Ramirez returned fire in measured, metronomic answer. No panic, just grammar. Someone ran past him hauling a jerry can. "Burn it," he shouted, and two other men repeated the word burn like it was a solution to a math they couldn't solve. "Not today," Whitaker muttered into the mic, and somewhere outside, sirens woke up properly and announced themselves. Fire trucks, the good kind of cavalry. Marin saw him then, a man backed against a wall, hands out, body saying don't, and face saying please. He had a beard that had not been asked whether it wanted to grow, and a shirt that once advertised a softball team. His eyes were kind of blue you get in certain hospitals when the glass is clean and the sky is not. He looked like he had borrowed a life and lost the receipt. "Lyle," Gabe said. He flinched. Recognition made his mouth open and then close like a fish learning air again. "You came," he said, wonder beating fear by a nose. "Let's go," Gabe said. "Can't," Lyle said. "They wired the door. If I move, something in the ceiling gets mad, and then we're all headlines." He grinned, brief, like the memory of a grin stretched through pain. "I always wanted to be on TV, but not as a cautionary tale." Ramirez surveyed the doorway. Wires like veins snaked toward a bucket that tried to look like a bucket and contained something more urgent. She didn't touch anything. She talked to the air as if it were a student who could be made to learn. "We need EOD."
2 minutes, Eloise's voice came in her ear. "We don't have 2 minutes," Whitaker replied. A new smell moved through the air. Gasoline, arguing with the past. "I can cut it," Lyle said, eyes on the wire. "I did enough convoy to know which red is a liar." "You twitch and we read about you," Gabe said. "You'll read about me anyway," Lyle answered, and the joke held because it had to. "Let me earn a different paragraph." He moved his hands like a man who had negotiated with worse gods. He pinched a wire, tested its give, looked at the bucket and the ceiling and the door as if trying to make them gentlemanly. He pulled a multi-tool from his pocket like a magician embarrassed by his own trick. He cut. Everyone in the room held their breath like breath was scarce. The wire sighed. The ceiling did not get mad. The door exhaled into a normal door again. "Go," Ramirez said. They went. Out into air that tasted like the river had learned to carry smoke, but decided not to. Sirens called to one another. Men with small moral imaginations went face down on gravel and found it did not forgive. Eloise ran towards them with a look that made her young and old at once. "You owe me a file," she told Gabe, "and a story, preferably both in formats that can be submitted to the court." Lyle sagged against the van. He looked at Marin and tried to stand up straighter, as if the presence of a civilian required posture. "You the daughter?" he asked. She nodded. "You the ghost?" "Some days," he said. "Other days I'm just a man who didn't answer a phone until the wrong people taught me it was time." He swallowed hard enough that it hurt to watch. "He was a good one," Lyle said, meaning her father. "I know," Marin said, and realized it felt different to hear it from the man who had stood next to him when knowing had to be earned daily. They loaded Lyle into an ambulance, because EMTs take whoever the room gives them and make their charts make sense later. He caught Gabe's sleeve before the doors closed. "They'll try again. Not here. Somewhere there isn't water and fire trucks 5 minutes away. They don't like to lose face. We'll keep your face. For as long as it takes." The doors shut. The ambulance rode a line of light down the road like a sentence whose verbs had finally been conjugated right. After, there were the parts of victory that don't feel like winning. Statements, and chain of custody, and the quiet after adrenaline had burned off and left you sitting in your own bones. Eloise cataloged. Ramirez commended a captain who had arrived with water like a miracle. Whitaker shook hands with a detective who didn't like feds until today, and now liked them like a dog learns to like the mailman who brings biscuits. Gabe stood with Marin by the river, watching a piece of wood float past like it had nowhere urgent to be. He flexed his hands once, the bones popping a soft thank you. "You shouldn't have been there," he said finally. "You keep saying that, and then handing me keys." He smiled, tired and uncomplicated. "Fair." He sobered. "There's a thing I haven't told you." "That my father saved you?" You wrote as much between the lines. Not that part. He swallowed. When we were pinned down one night, we made a trade. Men do that. We didn't call it vows because we didn't want to make it sound more important than getting through the hour. But it was. He said if anything ever happened, and there was a debt that came due he couldn't pay, I was to find you and pay it in whatever currency it demanded. Money? She asked, because jokes sometimes are bridges. Truth. And testimony. And presence, where presence was the thing that saves somebody from doing something alone. He looked at her. The river licked the bank, indifferent to vows and U.S. cases. He asked me to keep my word. That's what I wrote on the photo so I wouldn't forget it was more than a way to get the right hands on the right boxes. She breathed. The air in her lungs felt like it had been overdue and finally arrived. You kept it. I'm still keeping it. Debts like that are not paid once. They went back to the hall where the day settled into the long bureaucracy of justice. The board member, handcuffed, tried on a dozen expressions. None fit. His lawyer arrived sweating. Eloise smiled at him like an animal bears teeth as a courtesy, not a threat. Ramirez conferred with a U.S. attorney who had hard shoes and eyes that had learned to see past swagger. When evening returned to the world, a press conference assembled itself like weather. Microphones, a backdrop with seals, people in suits saying words calibrated for ears that had jogged too early and needed caffeine. Ramirez did her part with the grace of someone who hates cameras but likes nouns. She thanked the fire department and the anonymous tipsters and the private citizens whose decency refused to file a time card. Marin stood off to the side, where the camera could catch her if it wanted and might not if it wasn't paying attention. Gabe stood beside her like a tall parenthesis. The U.S. attorney mentioned a local resident who chose courage at the cash register and conscience at the crossroads. And reporters turned, sniffing story. Ramirez shook her head once. Not today.
After the microphones had had their dinner and gone to sleep, after the suits had put their jackets over their arms like capes they'd grown tired of wearing, after Eloise had finally allowed herself to take her sneakers off and rub the place where a shoelace always insists on having a personality, they all ended up at the diner because the world likes circles. Roz had saved 2 slices of pie like sacraments. She set them on the counter and pushed mugs toward them. "Well?" she asked, eyebrows doing most of the talking. "We'll need more napkins," Marin said, and then she told the story the way you'd tell a story to someone who washed your aprons when the machine ate the drawstring and who knows your rent day even when you don't say it. She left out the parts that didn't belong to her to tell. She kept the parts that did and placed them on the table like utensils. Roz listened and sliced more pie, because pie is how some people hold the line against the world. She shook her head at the right places and laughed at the paradoxes because she has seen customers use ketchup as religion. When Marin finished, Roz leaned her elbows on the counter. "You bring me a story worth hearing," she said, satisfied. "You also bring me back my server tomorrow, or I'm hiring the girl with the nose ring who calls every customer babe and means it." "I'll be here," Marin promised. Gabe ate with the intensity of a man who hadn't had the luxury of hunger in days. He paused, fork halfway between plate and mouth. "You ever think about changing jobs?" he asked Marin. "You offering?" she said. "Not that," he said. "Just, this thing isn't done. The case will wind through years like a bad river. They'll try to discredit witnesses. They'll try to make good look expensive." He hesitated. "We could use someone who remembers what a room feels like when the truth enters. Juries trust that more than they trust charts." Marin looked at her hands. One had a faint burn from the coffee maker. The other wore an imprint from a dog tag that had warmed into her. "I make rent here. I hold strangers' mornings together with coffee and jokes." "You held something bigger today," he said. "I held it because you dropped it into my hands," she replied. "Maybe that's the job, being the hands." He accepted the yes inside the maybe. He finished his pie. He wiped his plate with his fork because some hungers demand neatness. Night drove them all home, or to versions of home that did not mind if you arrived with gunpowder under your fingernails and a new idea of what loyalty weighs. Ramirez texted once, "Lyle under protection. Stable says to tell the flashlight kid he'll bring bait to the river when the case is done. Eloise sent a picture of the hard drive in a locker that did not require a letter to open. Whitaker sent nothing, which was his way of saying, "We're good until we aren't." Marin climbed the metal stairs to the apartment above the laundromat. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner, thinking too hard. She let herself in and stood still until the room recognized her again. On the chipped saucer, the dog tag. In her pocket, the locket. On the table, the photo. She set them side by side like a triptych of a small private church with no walls and an altar made of cheap wood. She turned the photo over and touched the scrawl again. "When you meet her, tell her I kept my word. Gr." She imagined Gabe writing it with hands that learned to aim better than a pen requires. She imagined her father holding promises like tools, not like poetry. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You did good, kid. L." She smiled, then frowned, then smiled again, because some confusions are what you want. The town slept. Somewhere a siren practiced its scales. The river slid by, negotiating with the dark. Marin lay down and stared at the ceiling until the fan's slow circles made a lullaby out of everything sharp. Morning ate the night in reasonable bites. Marin dressed for the diner, braid neat, apron tied. She tucked the locket under her shirt like a hello only she heard. When she stepped onto the street, the air tasted like new bread and old asphalt. The black SUV waited at the curb, engine off, agents inside replaced by an empty promise. She laughed at herself for expecting chariots. Then it pulled up from a half-block down, because of course it had been there, except the part of the mind that prefers denial had drawn a curtain.
Ramirez got out with a cup of tea, already in hand. 4-win coffee would be an escalation, she said, passing it like a baton. "What now?" Marin asked. "Now we prepare for court," Ramirez said. "We build a case that doesn't depend on any one person being perfect. We teach a jury how to count without being counted by a con. We make sure Lyle doesn't vanish twice." "And you?" Marin asked. "Paperwork," Ramirez said, making a face like a child told to eat broccoli that bites back. "And a meeting where someone in a tie will say the word optics and I will say the word tourniquet until the word optics learns humility." "Where does that leave me?" Marin asked. She tilted her head. "It leaves you with your life back, if you want it," she said. "It also leaves you with a number you can call when someone in your diner needs a motel room and a room keyed to more than a night." She held out a card. It had fewer words than a normal card and more meaning. "You were the hinge. The door will remember." Marin took the card. The paper was thick the way some doors are. "Tell Eloise I liked her sneakers," she said. "Because what else do you say to the government at 8 a.m. on a Tuesday when your heart has decided to be private again?" "She'll take that under advisement," Ramirez said dryly, and drove away. At the diner, Roz pretended not to be waiting at the door and failed. She hugged Marin with the awkward ferocity of someone who doesn't do hugging but would do a felony for you. "You bring me that story," she said into Marin's hair. "You bring me that story and then you bring me the receipts because we're claiming the pie on your taxes as a war expense." Marin laughed against her shoulder. "Deal." The bell did its 2-note thing, the day did its day. Joe from the tire shop apologized with $2 and a weird drawing of a dinosaur. Mr. Henley read the sports page and did not wipe his oatmeal spoon on the counter. Teenage skateboarders tried to look tough and ordered milkshakes and said thank you when they thought nobody could hear them do it. At 10, the door opened and the winter gray eyes walked in again. No duffel, jacket clean, beard trimmed down to practical. He sat at the counter like he had always been sitting at the counter, in a version of the day where the part with the warehouse hadn't happened yet, but the pie still would. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring. "Amen," he said, and they both smiled because repetition can be a prayer. "You'll testify," she said, mostly to reassure herself she could keep him in this timeline. "I will," he said, "and then I'll go somewhere quiet until the part where I'm useful again." "You could stay," she said, surprising herself. He looked at her, and she felt the gift of being looked at exactly and not more.
I could, he said. I could also go where the river keeps secrets and the catfish taste like batteries. You owe Lyle a fishing trip, she said. I owe him a life. We'll start with fish. She topped off his mug. He left a 5 under it again, a ritual that made the room feel orderly. When he stood to go, he hesitated. If the SUV pulls up again, he joked, and not, tell them I went to church. You're already there, she said, nodding at the mug. Communion. He left. The bell sang. Marin watched him cross the street without being followed by anyone visible. She breathed. She took an order. She wiped a counter. She changed the napkin shim under table 6 because now it required 3 instead of 2. She told the story twice to people who needed to hear stories. She told a shorter version to herself because she wanted to hear the part where the ending wasn't the end. At close, she locked up and stood under the neon sign while the moth began its nightly geometry. She thought about where the story had required her and where it had spared her. She thought about promises that cross years like bridges built from breath. She fingered the locket. She touched the dog tag. She looked up at the slice of sky that cities allow and whispered a thank you that wasn't to anyone in particular, but felt received. On her phone, a notification bloomed from a news app she hadn't remembered downloading. Federal raid recovered stolen medical supplies. 3 arrested, more charges expected. Beneath it, a smaller alert. Local diner worker credited with key role. She winced, then laughed, then sighed. She put the phone back in her pocket. She wasn't a headline. She was a hinge. Hinges don't get bylines. They get to hold. On the walk home, the laundromat windows made a soft aquarium glow. Someone's clothes swam slow circles inside. The world continued, forgiving and implacable. At the foot of her stairs, a figure waited. Not in the shadows, just in the place where shadows decide what to do next. Gabe. He had his hands in his pockets and the posture of a man who had been arguing with himself and lost graciously. I forgot something, he said, when she reached him. What? She asked. Keys between her fingers. Habit, not fear. He pulled a small folded paper from his pocket. Directions to the place where the catfish tastes like battery acid, and the time the morning vogue behaves. He handed it to her. For when Lyle's ready. For when I'm ready. She took it. For when I am ready, she echoed. They stood there, a breath too long for strangers and too short for whatever the other category is. Then he nodded and turned, and walked away into a town that had learned his outline. She went up the stairs. Inside, the room greeted her like a dog that had agreed to be a houseplant while she was gone. She set the directions, next to the letter, next to the photo, next to the tag. She made tea. She opened the window. The night entered politely. When sleep came, it did not come all at once. It came in installments, paid on time. In the last waking moment, a thought arrived that did not ask permission. Some debts take the long way home. Some truths do too. You keep the porch light on anyway. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.